Welcome to Try This at Home. I'm Cliff Bumgardner, and for the first time, I am all alone. Harrison unfortunately could not join today. No worries, everything's fine. He will be back next time. But I guess I shouldn't say I am alone because I have a fantastic guest, someone we have talked about all through the first season of Try This at Home, and I'm so excited to actually have on the podcast. He is a voice artist whose iconic narration has appeared in everything from commercials to documentaries, movie trailers, and of course, Mythbusters. He is the voice you hear in your head whenever you think about the show, and who we've done horrible impressions of throughout the entire first season. He worked on every single episode of Mythbusters, including the various specials and spin-off series, which makes him the longest-serving member of the Mythbusters cast. I am so thrilled to get to talk to the voice of Mythbusters, Robert Lee. Rob Lee, welcome to Try This at Home. Thank you so much for being here.
It's a great pleasure, Cliff. Thank you so much for having me. And as I said, thank you for your service.
Well,
taking on a deadly mission.
It definitely feels that way. When we first started the show, we didn't quite realize how many episodes there were every season. So we're in it now, though. We're going to do it. We're going to make it happen.
Good work.
I know folks are going to be so excited to hear about your time on Mythbusters specifically, but before we get into that, I would love to hear a little bit about your background. Did you grow up knowing that you had a great voice, or how did this all start for you?
Oh, look, it's like life. It sort of happens to you while you're busy making other plans, I guess. But I remember as a youngster, about 13 or 14, my cousin got a cassette recorder for Christmas. His dad, recorded a piece onto a cassette, and I recorded a piece on the cassette, and my voice was deeper than his. It had just broken, I thought, oh, that's cute. And then I put that away for a while, and I remember a guy in high school saying that he wanted to be a radio announcer when he grew up, and I said, that is ambitious. That's amazing. And, it came to me wanting to basically leave school. And I went to what was called the Commonwealth Employment Service, and I said, well, read out a few professions. And he hit radio announcer, and I thought, yeah, I'll do that. And ultimately, I got a job in radio, and then from there, the interest sort of blossomed.
Now, you said Commonwealth there. Was this in Australia?
This is in Australia. So I was born in England many years ago, and moved to Canada when I was 7, just turned 7, and left for Australia. My father was an Australian, my mother was English. Left for Australia in 1974, and I basically have been here ever since, and definitely, gone back to the States and Canada a number of times, of course, but yeah, Australia's my home.
That's fantastic. So you were doing radio. Was like television and film kind of a natural leap from there, or how did that come about?
Oh, well, definitely I've got a perfect face for radio. So, we'll just leave it at that. But no, it was radio audio. And, I knew that because here in Australia, I've had this outrageous speech impediment, as somebody called it once. That is an accent. I think really I was only going to go so far on air. But I pursued, I guess, voiceovers and started small, started with local ads, and as I moved stations and such, I eventually got an agent and started doing voiceovers, professionally. And from there, it worked up to, if you like, long form television narration. It didn't start with that, but it sort of worked up to it, which is great. I thought it's a great challenge, and yeah. I was lucky enough to sort of, I wouldn't say hit pay dirt, but get a lot of long form stuff over the years.
Is that the sweet spot for you? Do you think long form, is that like your favorite thing to do, or do you have a certain style that you like most?
Oh, look, as you go through, I've been doing this for 40 odd years or more. Your career just takes its natural progression. Yes, you can lead it, and, eventually I've just ended up sort of focusing on that. There's not as much demand out here for American voiceovers on radio for ads and things like that as there was, 10, 20 years ago. So yeah, this is where I've ended up, and I'm happy for that. It's been a good ride.
I'll have to off air get your advice, because I started doing little voiceovers for the video work that I do. And the first time I did a long form thing, I think my throat hurt for 3 days. It is such a
Yeah.
marathon kind of approach to when
Oh,
you're doing
totally.
something that long.
Yeah, totally. Well, when you can spend an hour doing one 30-second commercial, uh, but when you narrate, you've got to do the show in an hour, or whatever. It is. It can. I've done a couple of 2-hour episodes over the years of Mythbusters and others, and it is a real challenge. Doing 3 or more hours, wow, you're very special if you can do that continuously, and I don't think you can really. But on air is different, of course. But you're stopping down, of course. So you're not doing it continuously. But yeah, it is. It's a different set of sort of vocal skills, I guess.
So getting to the Mythbusters of it all, how did that first come across your desk? Was that just a job that came in, or what do you remember about the earliest days of that gig?
Well, as you know, it's Beyond Productions production, post produced here in Australia in Sydney, and I'd been doing. I've been doing narration for them for a little while. So, they were familiar with me and my work. I always say, "Hi, I'm Rob Lee. You may remember me from such medical documentaries as When Anesthesia Fails, When Surgical Instruments Get Left Behind, and my favorite, You Swallowed What?" So, and then one day, Peter Reese, came up to me in the Beyond office and said, "Look, I've got this little show going, pilot series about busting myths. Do you want to give it a go?" So we worked out a read style and gave it a go and went from there.
What was the pitch of the show at that point? That's something that we've talked about so much on our show is we have a certain memory of Mythbusters from the many years and where it would go in the end. It's a very science-focused show. When we went back to the pilots, we were sort of stunned by how the show began and how kind of very much story and documentary it was in those early days. Do you remember kind of what the original idea was that you heard or what you thought the show was going to be like?
In my mind, it was testing or busting urban myths. Particularly, specifically urban myths. Now, whatever they are, right? It didn't matter. But it wasn't about testing things out so much. It was about busting those things. And that JATO rocket car was a myth. And, they spent a lot of time on that one thing. So the process was, I think, the focus in the early years. And then the show developed its own personality from there. But, initially it was, well, of course, the show had personality to begin with, of a very specific type, great type. Anti-TV guys, they just didn't look as if they belonged on television, but, they did. But yeah, initially it was busting urban myths. I had never heard of the biscuit bazooka, um, but the cell phone destroys gas station. I mean, oh, look, I love that one. So yeah, it was interesting, and yeah, it developed its own, I think, personality through the telling of these myths. And then eventually, after a few, I don't know, whether a couple of seasons or so, the starter said, "Well, I think they've done it all. What are they going to do next?" But they found stuff. So
You mentioned that personality the show had, and we have felt like through our whole rewatch, we talked about it multiple times on the show, that you're such a huge part of that personality, as especially in the early days, it's just Adam and Jamie. We haven't met Cary Grant and Tori yet. You're the third voice. Like you were that third, Mythbuster, for lack of a better term. You mentioned coming up with a read style and what that approach was like. Could you talk a little bit about like what your approach was or what voice you thought the show needed early on?
These days everybody overanalyzes stuff. Really, what you do is what we did was, yeah, I just had to sound a little more exciting, a little younger, and that was it. I mean, we didn't know, it wasn't overthought, if you like.
Yeah.
Eventually yes, you're right. See, the thing is, of course, the narration. I mean, the real heroes here, as far as my end is concerned, are the writers. To quote the opening credits to Deadpool. And they are, because they're the ones that notwithstanding all the great work that's done on camera, of course. But the writers have to go through, hundreds of hours of vision and, not cobble together, but pull together a story, in a particular edit and the narration that goes with it to join those things up. So it was, like I say, I think the writers were, we can do this, or Rob can say this to, maintain a little humor or, a funny link or running joke or whatever it might be. And it just developed over time.
That actually talking about that part of the process and sort of the writing and where you would come in is something I wanted to ask you about, because I think for folks who may not know quite how television is made and kind of how these things happen, they might be surprised to find out kind of how late in the game oftentimes the narrator is brought in, or, even to hear, I think folks are surprised to hear, wait, he wasn't there. I think that even that, for folks who don't know how the sausage gets made, is a surprise. Could you kind of walk through what the process is like on a job like that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I come in at the end of that process, really. When I first started doing this and other shows, for Beyond, they'd courier to me a script and a VHS copy of the fine cut, or sometimes a rough cut, but a fine cut, mostly. And, I'd go through the script, go through the fine cut, go back through the script, mark it up, and then trot off to the studio a day later or so to put it down. That became eventually DVDs, and, eventually it all sort of happened online. So, there was certainly prep work. And sometimes, of course, I'd make some suggestions to the scripts. We're certainly not changing the scripts, but inputting where it was appropriate. And, the writers and their wisdom or, their skill allowed it to happen, occasionally from time to time.
Were you a fan of the show when it came out? Are you able to watch stuff that has your voice in it?
Well, look, I love the show. I think the show is great, and I would be watching it even if I wasn't involved. There's no doubt about that. Some of the stuff they get up to is just brilliant. Not every show can be better than the one before, but, there were some amazing highlights. And I think my surprise or delight in what we were watching on the screen, I think hopefully that came through in the read.
That has to be such an interesting day in the office where the tape that you get is a rocket strapped to the top of a car being shot across the desert, and you go, this is what I get to work on? How cool is that?
Yeah, well, I wasn't there. I would have loved to be. I have actually been to visit M5 a few times, and I'm actually even for a split second on the screen in one shot.
Really?
But hard to tell. But it's a great process to watch. But it is really driven. There's a lot of planning that goes into it, as I understand it. But it is a reality program, because I can remember Adam walking around M5 doing something, then suddenly he grabs a 2x4 and puts it on a table and starts measuring and sawing off a length for something. And the cameras burst into action, the cameraman burst into action, and the sound guy. And so they have to be there to capture that stuff, when it happens. It wasn't, right, we're doing scene 1, act 2. There's none of that. It's that sort of thing. So, but I only saw that, a number of times. And they did that for 14 years or more. So, kudos to them for that. They're the ones doing the real work.
Do you know what myth it was that you appear in briefly? We'll have to keep an eye out for it.
Of course I do. It's playing on a conveyor belt.
Oh, that's a legendary one. I know Adam talks about that myth a lot to this day.
Yeah, there was a lot of kerfuffle about that, but Jamie was the sensible one, I think, if I recall correctly in the show. He said, "This is bunk, but we'll do it anyway." Something to that effect.
Talking about the writers in that process, one of the hallmarks of sort of the tone of Mythbusters, and I think something that you often get brought up in the conversation of, is the puns that were often in the script. Was that something you were a fan of, or would you look at the script and go like, how am I going to make this work?
Pretty much the latter. Yeah, sure. The puns were sort of a part of a signature, part of the sound, I guess you might say. Again, the magic of the writers. And I think Adam actually captured it once in one of his YouTube videos. Okay, I've just got to say this. I'm going to say it. We're going to have it. Do it and get over it. It'll all be good. And yes, I took the piss occasionally. Yeah.
That's some of our favorite moments. I have referred to you lovingly as the Han Solo of Mythbusters because it's the character who's pointing out this is patently absurd what we're up to right now. And you kind of need that to not take the show too seriously sometimes and just remember, oh right, we're all having fun here.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd have to point out some of it's really amazing the way the show did develop too, because, in that first show, you had Jamie in a helicopter, remote controlling a car. Like, remote controlling a car was the thing that really fascinated me. And then, of course, it was done a number of times. Grant did it a number of times. So the first time he did it, they spent a bit of time on, getting the service, showing where the servers were and how this does that and the other. They did it the next time. They didn't quite spend so much time on it. And then, after that, Grant's remote controlled the car. Now let's move on. And because we've covered that. So the process is really interesting in many ways too. The penny drop, was another ingenious demonstration, I guess, of applied science or physics or whatever. And they were very talented, and some of it was so totally crazy. And I had to bring people along for that journey, I guess, or the narration did. The narration had to do that.
That is something that we have realized going back and watching the early days of the show is we would see something like the remote control car and go like, oh, why are they spending so much time on this? And then realize that we're living in a world where Mythbusters exists. And so, like you said, seeing a remote control car, it's like, yeah, of course, that's just what you do. And going back to these early shows and going, right, this was fresh then. Nobody had seen anything like this then.
That's exactly right.
Really makes a difference in, I think, how we viewed these early episodes of the show and just how remarkable it is. Did you feel like in those early days that it was going to be a hit, or did you have any idea or expectation of what it might do?
I thought it was really unique. I was hoping there would be more than 3. But you never know with television. And Discovery and their wisdom, sort of said, well, okay, we'll get 8 more for the second season. And then that was it. Okay, cool. And they said they want some more, and just went on from there. So, it was nice, 1, to be available, 2, to be wanted, and, 3, to have an opportunity to work on a show that was really growing and establishing its own footprint on, the television marketplace, I guess.
Could you talk a little bit about, you mentioned, obviously, you're in Australia and the show is produced out of Australia. Something Adam has mentioned over the years is that he really feels the show was heavily influenced by an Australian sense of humor and kind of style to the show. Do you feel that in it? And where does that kind of manifest, if so?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely it does. It's like, Australians aren't too pretentious, and they call out a bit of pretentiousness. So they keep, I'm sure they would have kept Adam and Jamie's feet on the ground. And that's the production crew itself, or the people that they're working with on the show that came from Australia. And that just creeps through everything, But the show was written by Australians, it was written by English, written by others as well, a number of English people, actually. So it was really international, but it definitely was filtered through the Australian psyche in some ways. And, Australian media production levels are the best, as good as anywhere in the world, of course. But they're very pragmatic. they don't take any bullshit, So I don't know. I imagine that, but definitely, that Australian sense of humor came through the writing and the humor and the narration.
Was the show as big of a hit in Australia as it has been here and elsewhere, do you think?
Oh, I would imagine so, yeah. Initially it was on cable television here in Australia. on the Discovery Channel. And you know the penetration of cable back then in Australia was not as big as it is in America. So not everybody could see the show, but it came out on a free-to-air network a year or two later, initially with an Australian narration, but then they started to take the American narration from here in Australia. So yeah, it was popular. I don't know look, there were ratings, but that's not my field of real interest. But yeah, and they were looked at. And I think they did very well for their target audience group, whatever that might be, on the Discovery Channel in the States.
Was this the most popular, most talked about thing you had done up to that point?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yes.
What was that? What was it just like for you as somebody who's been working in the industry to see something like that, go that big or as big as it has been all these years?
Well, it's really exciting, of course, to be a part of a show that's so unique and so popular and really impactful in many ways, on people's lives. People making career decisions based on, watching the show with their dad, that sort of thing, or their mom. So, to be a part of that is really special and definitely not something that comes along very often in a voiceover's life.
Absolutely. We have tried, if there's a question that our podcast kind of asks, is why did this particular show work and last the way that it has when there became other imitators? There were other shows that blew stuff up. There were other shows that did slow-mo. But there was, I think our sort of thesis has been, but there was no show that did all of that and told you a story the way that they told a story. Since you were often the voice really stringing that story together, what do you think about that, of Mythbusters as a storytelling device beyond the obviously high profile, we're going to blow stuff up and it's cool to see stuff blow up aspects of the show?
Well, that's probably a question for the writers, I think, more than me. But there's no doubt, yes, they tell the story, give context to the myth, what the myth is, give context to the myth. Then they break it down to see how they could actually, tackle it, given their skill sets and tools and such, and budgets and whatever. And then, okay, let's do it. And they did it. And if they couldn't do it, they try to emulate it or to make it happen or whatever. But satisfaction was guaranteed.
You mentioned earlier a couple of myths that you loved. Are there any particular episodes, especially from the very early days of the show, that stand out in your mind for one reason or another?
This is the hardest question you can ask anybody involved in the show. And I think you know that. I was listening, I heard Adam on the radio here in Australia actually recently, and he said, it was something that was very personal to him. But to me, I think the big ones, the moon landing myths, oh goodness me, you put me on the spot, Cliff. There's so many. It's really hard to call out favorites, but definitely the one with the President of the United States. That was later, though I wasn't there, but to be a part of that show was a great honor.
It's actually quite funny when you look up, there's a Wikipedia page for cast from Mythbusters, and I was looking at that today in preparation for this. And so you see, it actually lists Robert Lee, Heather Joseph Witham, Barack Obama.
Well, he's got an IMDb page now, doesn't he? Barack Obama.
What a cast!
Yeah. Crazy.
Crazy.
Oh, but don't forget, we've also had James Cameron, we've had Vince Gilligan, and, some really amazing people that have, joined the show from time to time, which is, again, I think a testament to the show itself. And so there's a lot of, it's got a great pedigree, hasn't it?
Talking about those early days and some surprises, something that we had no expectation of that I think you might be surprised by as well, is that you were actually the first person to say myth busted on the show.
There you go.
Because all through the pilots, and I think even the first couple of main series episodes, they don't have the busted sign. They don't have any of that kind of convention built yet. And there's one myth, and I don't have it in front of me as to which one it was, but there's one myth where they go, yeah, this couldn't work. And you just say, this myth is busted in the narration. And we're like, wow, what a distinction that we would have thought Adam or Jamie, but that is yours. So I didn't know if you were aware of that, and I wanted to make you aware if not.
Well, look, somebody would have had to have said it. It's the name of the show. So, it's an obvious one. But yeah, that might be the case. I actually watched the last show the other day too. And it's been a blast, is the final narration on that thing. But yeah, there you go. I didn't realize that, but yes, thank you. I'll take it.
Something else I didn't realize till I was looking it up today, and it makes sense, but I just hadn't thought about it, is in different markets, as you mentioned, and obviously different languages, there were other narrators of the show. Did you ever get to meet or get to know any of your counterparts?
Yeah, the show was actually originally packaged to, excuse me. The show was originally packaged to drop in a local narrator, in England and wherever else, and Australia for that matter. But that TV station, I think, thought, well, it's on Discovery. We know what's going on, so they just basically took that version. I have chatted online with the British one, Robin Banks, nice guy, and two totally different sounds, and two totally different approaches to that. So I wouldn't say it's a different episode, but it's definitely a different read. But yeah, I've met one of them, not the others.
That's still very cool. It is super hard for me to imagine Mythbusters with any other voice in it. So I'm going to have to track down some of those episodes because I feel like it would fundamentally feel like a different show to me without you there. So,
well, I think, the people that have gotten used to Robin's read would say the very same thing. So, there it is. It's what you're used to. So, yeah.
It's interesting. It's interesting how that sticks in people's heads so much as part of the show, considering that it does change and considering that, as you said, it was originally packaged not to be there. It's fascinating to me that when I can tell you from us producing this podcast, we would mention we're making Mythbusters podcast and we were hoping to get to interview some of the original crew, and people would go, "Ooh, you're talking to the narrator?" They remember that voice. And I don't know if that's the case with as many other shows, that the narrator feels so tied to the tone or even just the world of the show the way you were. Do you feel like there's anything to that?
Consistency is important, I think, firstly. And, if I was dropped in at the beginning and, I was coming up with the goods every time, every season, you'd be silly to sort of change jockeys mid-race, so to speak. How people consider that my contribution as a central part of the show, well, it may be, but it's fun, and we are all in this together, sort of thing. So it was a happy family.
So talking about the tone of the show, there is one particular moment that we hit on in our rewatch that I think speaks very well to exactly what you did on the show. And I would love to play that for you. I'll give some context for you and for the listeners. This is from a myth about a Hungarian village who built a cannon out of a tree to defend themselves. And in the episode, Adam and Jamie have to recreate the cannon. And to do that, they have to make period accurate tools to recreate the cannon. So there's a scene where Jamie makes this medieval spoon drill thing. And of course, he does it perfectly. And it's just, he does an incredible thing, and it's like 10 seconds of the show. He just makes it. And as a viewer, I think it would be very easy to let that pass by, to just be like, oh, okay, he made a thing. And that's where you come in, because very specifically, and the way that the writers set this up was great, but your delivery of this line made us laugh to no end. So Jamie has made the drill, and you just come in to comment on the fact that he has done this.
It's the best medieval drill Jamie's made all day.
It's the all day that killed me so much when we listened to that episode. I would just love to hear. I know you talked about, the approach is a lot more simple than people often think, but in a moment like that, you're doing some lifting for the show there and for the way that that's coming across to the viewer. Could you talk about moments like that and kind of
Well,
what you remember?
yeah, I was like, they're normalizing the abnormal, I guess, in a way, if you like. But again, how often in a day do you make a medieval tool? Firstly, well, I've only made one today, but yesterday I made three. But this one, just done one today. So it was a bit, yeah. Send it up a bit. It's look. This is wow. He just whipped up a medieval tool. It's the best one he's done all day. It's there. It's there for the taking.
It's
Yeah.
great.
So brilliant writing. Yeah.
And there was another one I didn't pull, but there was one recently on one of the last episodes where, for whatever reason, I think the writers decided it was funny for your kind of point of view to be that Adam is a bit goofy, because of course that comes across on the show from time to time, and they kind of indulge in that. And so there's just a line where Adam's like, "I've done more work in less time," and you just go, "He also has done less work in more time, but today he's doing okay." And then the show moves on, and we were like, "Wow, Adam's just catching it from everywhere today."
Maybe it's that Australian sensibility again. It's. But yeah, I mean, look, it's a great honor to be able to deliver those lines, but also to have a bit of fun with them as well. And that interpretation is something that again developed over time. But yeah, it was a great opportunity. A wonderful opportunity. Hopefully that I delivered.
Does a show like that give you more running room when, I mean, obviously like a commercial or a radio spot might be, not only is it shorter, but it's also, I've heard, I think Ken Burns' term is that he likes narrators to be God's stenographer, right? He wants like no emphasis, no inflection, no anything. You get a show like Mythbusters, like you can go places that I don't know many other shows that would allow you to even go there. Was that a fun challenge to embrace, or a fun part of the show to embrace?
Yeah, it's fun. The sessions are fun. The writers are there with me, and we're having a little bit of banter. We'd look at a line and say, "Well, hold on. How does this line work? Does it work this way? Could it work that way? What do you want to do? Do you want to leave? Do you want to leave it up in the air? You want to resolve it? Whatever." It's yeah, that was it. Yeah, absolutely. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with the flat narration being God's stenographer. And really seriously, this is really important too. I think in writing narration for writing narration for long form, is that you've got to leave room for the script to breathe. Too much narration compacted too heavily is really hard for people to, one, take in, and two, deliver, firstly, but certainly for people to take in. And I was blessed that the writers actually wrote with my voice in their mind. So they'd actually mark things up on the script occasionally, saying, "Look, you need to deliver this a little faster than normal because it's a tight scene," or whatever. So it was nice to have that freedom, if you like, to be able to not be rushed in delivery all the time. Now, when you go in to do a commercial or some other short form stuff, the brief is a lot more specific, and you've got a much more, the time constraint is the one that tells you this is what you got to work in, this is the sound we want, go for it. Do it again, lose a second, but don't sound rushed. It's like. It's that sort of stuff. So, yeah, horses for courses there. But definitely, for narration, you really have to get, and even time for a breath, a breath in the narration itself, can be very effective. So, I think that's really important.
A name you mentioned earlier that I wanted to be sure to ask you about, because he comes up a lot on the show and in people we've talked to, but I don't know as a name that your average Mythbusters fan would know, is Peter Rees. What do you recall about working with him or him in the early days of the show, and your kind of any memories or recollections of Peter?
Yeah, sure. I mean, he was he knew what he wanted, and it was great to work with somebody knew what he wanted, and he knew that the show was going to grow as well, and change and evolve. But he was a great pleasure to work with, as was his successor, Dan Tapster. But I didn't work with those people every day. I worked with the writers mostly, more than the showrunners, as Dan calls himself.
There's a couple of names that we've seen pop up, but credits are kind of hard to find on writers, and obviously crediting writers on TV shows gets a little bit complicated from time to time. Anyone that you think fans should know or know their contribution to the show?
Look, I wouldn't be doing them a service if I left them out, but I don't want to sort of like just highlight one and say that they're the best. They're all great, and I worked with many of them for seasons at a time, and had a lot of fun with all of them. And it's great. It's a relationship. It was a relationship for us. So I really don't want to call out any writers in particular. All the writers are there. Writers, producers, if you like, they might be labeled as producers. And they were all brilliant. And there was some, and they each had a style. And, it was funny. It was interesting to see a different style of writing slightly each year, each season, if you like.
We hope to in the future get to talk to some of those folks, because I am obsessed with, I guess with my background, I'm kind of obsessed with the unsung heroes of a show, the people who, make the show, but you may not know their name. We want to find the high-speed camera operators, people who, without them, the show isn't what it is, but nobody probably knows their name unless you were on that crew or on that production. So hopefully we'll get to do that at some point down the road.
Well, good luck. And absolutely. These guys are all craftsmen, artisans and craftsmen, and they did their job brilliantly.
So as we're kind of wrapping up, another fact that I hit in my preparation for this episode is not only did you do over 300 episodes of Mythbusters, you also came back for some of the Return series. You did the Mythbusters The Search series. And so I think, if my information is correct, you were the longest tenured cast member on Mythbusters.
I think that might be the case, actually. But really, narrators aren't usually considered cast. To commissioning networks.
Sure.
So that aside, I did the Search, and then there was a couple of seasons of that, and Mythbusters Junior. That was fun. Motor Mythbusters, was also fun. That had Tori in it. And then, and I just recently completed, or late last year, a series of sort of 30-minute best ofs, if you like, called "There's Your Problem," Mythbusters, There's Your Problem, which airs here in Australia on the ABC network. So it's amazing that lasted. It's been a pretty good tenure.
Are you ever recognized just for your voice?
Very rarely. Occasionally. There was once when I was auditioning to do the MTV Video and Music Awards Australia. So I got into and I had to do a bit of a laundry list or something like that, and the executive producer was in the control room, and he this is early on, quite 10, 15 years ago. He said, "You sound like that guy from Mythbusters." And I said, "I am that guy from Mythbusters." He said, "Are you?" "Yeah, you've got the gig." So that was funny.
Mythbusters with some industry power. That's awesome.
Appealing to the right people, I guess.
I know that we've touched on this throughout this conversation, but I just want to give you an opportunity, because we've talked about now, how much of the show that you've done. When you look back, just on the whole, how do you feel about Mythbusters and having now been part of your life for so long?
Well, I've got to say, it's an amazing professional honor and personal sort of honor as well, I guess. As I said earlier, it's not very often that sort of gig for that many years comes along in a voiceover's life. It happens, of course, but this is the one for me, and I'm incredibly proud to be a part of that team.
Oh, that's fantastic. Even though Mythbusters is no longer on the air. Obviously, you're still doing some Mythbusters associated stuff, but I also wanted to give folks a chance to hear a little bit about what you've been up to since. Are you doing much of anything today? Are you retired? Where are things?
Well, I'm just relaxing mostly now. Definitely, we'll pick up the phone, if it rings. But I'm enjoying my life now too.
That's great. Where can folks find you? Are you active on social or anything like that?
Goodness, no.
Amen. I'm with you on that.
I certainly do a lot of lurking, I guess, because that's where everybody does stuff. So yeah, I'm across it, but I'm not an active poster per se. But I still do, and I love reposting Carrie Byron's ex posts. She's gone on to be a great science communicator, I like the good stuff and I ignore the bad stuff. But yeah, no, I'm laying low. But I'm not undiscoverable.
Are you still in touch with much of the cast these days?
Well, look, I've met them a number of times. We do not get on the phone to chat, but definitely when I was over there, and the one thing I got to say is every one of them, the way they are on television is the way they are personally, and they're lovely people, and I'll reach out occasionally, but no, we're it was our phase, our time together, and we've moved on.
That is fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us to talk about the show and your work on the show. We are massive fans of the work that you have done and so appreciative for what Mythbusters has meant to us. We started this podcast because it was, for both me and Harrison, it was one of our favorite shows in our lives, and we wanted to go back and see it again and sing it again now, all these years removed. We appreciate it even more. And there's not a lot of shows you can say that. It's been an interesting experience to go back and see something get better week by week in the way that show did. And you were a huge part of that. So thanks for the work that you do, and thanks for joining me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Cliff. Thank you so much, and the best to Harrison. And and good luck in your challenge. We'll be back to check on you from time to time.
Thank you once again to Rob Lee for coming on the show, sharing his memories, and just being so awesome all the way around. We can't wait to have him back as we continue our rewatch, which will resume, by the way, in January of 2025. But before we get there, we have one more very special bonus episode to share with you guys, and it's a doozy. Next week, here on the show, we will be talking to none other than the man himself, Adam Savage. We could not be more excited to go right to the myth-busting source and talk to Adam about these early days of the show and his memories. So definitely come back, join us next week. We can't wait. Until then, thanks for listening. Try This at Home is produced by Slugline Media. The show is written, hosted, edited, and shot onto the internet by Cliff Bumgardner and Harrison Stewart. Our music is by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. You can follow the show on Instagram at TryThisPod or email us, trythisathomepod@gmail.com.